Sup guys, it's Turtle. I'm back with another YouTuber debate breakdown, this time the recent debate between Blaire White and ContraPoint. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm really enjoying this recent wave of discussions between people with very different viewpoints. I feel it's doing a lot to break down the political polarization that seems to be becoming more and more prevalent recently. I would really like to go over all the points made in the stream, but I don't want this to be a 2-hour video. Now first, I want to make myself very clear. I went into this as unbiasedly and open-minded as possible. Though I will be going over the main points of the debate from the stream, I analysed each point on both sides. I do almost entirely agree with Blaire, but that in no way means I simply disregarded Contra's points. I can follow Contra's line of reasoning, that is, I understand how he got from thought A to thought B to view C. I understand it, but for the most part I do disagree with it. So, that being said, let's get into it. One of the big disparities during this debate was the use of language, which a lot of the minor disagreements boiled down to. At many points, Blaire used phrases such as trans women imitate the physical appearance of cis women, sex reassignment surgery leaves you with a wound that resembles the opposite genitalia, intersex people have a deformity, things of that nature. Contra tried to assert that Blaire stating things in this way was harmful or otherwise showed disgust on Blaire's end. Now the harmful part I can understand. I will never deny that assholes who don't like transgender individuals can use findings like that and twist it to push their own narrative, so I understand where Contra is coming from. However, just because some people can use truths in a harmful way does not mean we should abandon the truths altogether. And I know it can be difficult for people who don't have much experience in the scientific or medical world to understand it. When speaking in technical medical terms, you have to be as accurate, descriptive, and objective as possible. And speaking in these objective terms in no way means anyone thinks less of the person. I actually saw this argument thrown towards Bering previously as well, when he was stating that intersex people are statistically abnormal.
It's like, so how do you decide that a person's abnormal? Like, for example, I have depression. Am I abnormal?
No.
I'm an
no.
abnormal.
In the context we were in, it was if they were outside of the XX or XY chromosome makeup. That is how.
But you can't see, like, okay, if you say that person over there has an abnormality, you think of something negative?
No, that's what I'm saying. No,
of course you do.
What?
Of course you fucking do. If you say that person has...
No, I really don't.
Again, I can understand the reasoning. Many of these words do have a negative social connotation, therefore any use of the word maintains the connotation. However, the phrasing and the context of this information is what makes the difference. The way I see it, there are 3 ways you can phrase information like this. The socially acceptable everyday way, the scientifically technical way, and the derogatory way. For example, I can say someone who is intersex simply has a different set of genitalia. I can say they have a physical or genetic deformity or abnormality, or I can say they're a freak. The latter of which I would obviously never say, but do you see the difference? When one wishes to speak in scientific technicality, they must be able to separate social connotations from words. Those connotations do not exist in science. In those realms, you can use those terms without looking down on the person at all. It is simply stating something about the individual, not stating anything about their character or the way you view the characteristic. It is all about the context. And as Blaire said, in a social setting she would never refer to someone's genitalia as a wound. When using technical terms, that's what it is. And one could argue that this debate was in a social setting, but Blaire made it abundantly clear she was speaking in technical terms for multiple reasons. And it may just be because I'm studying in a medical field myself, but I completely agree with the sentiment. Another point of disagreement was Blaire's use of ad hominem attacks, or bullying as Contra put it. One of the biggest points of discussion regarding this was Zinnia Jones using the phrase that Blaire was enacting trans genocide, or something very close to that in a tweet, I believe. In response to this, Blaire used ad hominem by saying that Zinnia had bad yellow teeth. Now, I am a firm believer that resorting to ad hominem does reduce the validity of someone's argument, but do I think that Blaire's response was unreasonable? Absolutely not. Even Contra conceded that it was understandable for Blaire to become defensive when those kind of accusations are being made. Again, I understand the line of reason behind the statement. Blaire states her opinion, and as an assumption, people think this will impact trans youth either directly by them watching the videos, or indirectly through others watching them and coming to their own conclusions, which in turn potentially causes these trans youth becoming more at risk of becoming depressed or suicidal, or more at risk of physical assault as a result of the latter. Personally, I think this is a pretty long stretch made under a lot of assumptions. And some people are trying to turn it back on Blaire by saying, oh, so you don't like the wording, sort of like how you say trans people imitate cis people. But the claim that Blaire is enacting trans genocide purely by stating her opinion online is not objectively true. It is based on a lot of assumptions and, in my opinion, the claim has no real legitimate basis. And even if the reasoning was true, the term genocide would in no way be the appropriate technical term to use in that scenario. It is more akin to twisting information to push your own narrative, as I stated earlier. However, Contra, and I quote, believes that Zinnia was making a good faith judgment about Blaire through this statement. One of the reasons for this being Blaire's view on wanting a cure for gender dysphoria. I know I'm sounding like a record player, but again, I understand the reasoning, but wanting a cure for something someone has does not inherently imply that you want to do so by getting rid of the people who have it. Wishing there is a way to get rid of gender dysphoria does not equal wanting to get rid of trans people. Gender dysphoria is part of a trans person, not the individual themselves. In that sense, I feel Contra's logic is a bit flawed here. Finally, the topic of transgender children. In preparation for this video, I've actually done quite a bit of research, particularly into puberty blockers. And from what I can see, both Contra and Blaire are correct on different points. There's actually a great article that I found that I will link below that more or less details my thoughts on this issue, as well as two other really good sources that I found. Based on current research, it seems puberty blockers short-term do have reversible effects. What Blaire detailed, like the lack of increased bone density, the halt on reproduction, and secondary sex characteristic development, do appear to normalize after the child stops taking the blockers. However, the frightening part to me, which Contra seems to not take issue with, is the fact that, yes, taking puberty blockers does buy the child time to make the decision as to whether or not they want to pursue transition. In reality, it's not a great deal of time. Puberty blockers are usually prescribed between the ages of 9 to 13, during the second hormonal stage of puberty. Then, generally, the child decides whether or not to transition at the latest by the age of 14 to 16. And given that could be enough time for a child to decide that they don't want to transition, but if they do, it still means that puberty blockers are leading children to hormonally transition. And I personally still feel that 14 to 16 is too young for someone to make such a huge decision. And the long-term effects of puberty blockers have not been researched or documented whatsoever. Even short-term neurological effects have not been researched. In the article that I've linked, there is a statement that perfectly phrases mine and most likely Blaire's view. These queer children's bodily integrity and reproductive rights should not be any less pressing than other children's. Needless to say, children are not legally capable of consent, and 9 to 10-year-olds are not capable of understanding all the health consequences of the treatment. Parents are asked to make life decisions on issues as critical as fertility for young children. Obviously, if more research is done and we find in future that there are no lasting effects of puberty blockers, I will happily change my position. But for now, I do agree with Blaire's view that it's contradictory to agree with puberty blockers if you don't agree with children hormonally transitioning. And that, unfortunately, is all the points I'm able to go over at this time. I desperately wish I could go over the finer details of the stream, but it honestly would just take too long. So that's all for now. I'll catch you guys next time.